Hey everybody, my name is Albert. Today I'm here with Common Motor doing a bike tour of my 1972 Honda CB450K5. So I wanted to find a project bike, right? Something that I could work on. The vintage Hondas really spoke to me. I loved the way they looked. I loved the history behind it. Loved that it seemed to be a pretty approachable and understandable bike. And so I started my hunt for it. And that took me to Craigslist up in Michigan, where somebody had posted one for about 400 bucks. So it cost me more to ship it down than it did for me to buy the bike. At that point in time, it was completely stock, untouched, still had its original red tank, red side covers on it, and it may or may not have been running at that point in time, which I found out it wasn't when I received it, and got to work on it. Before then, I had never been on a bike, never ridden one. I didn't have my motorcycle license yet either, and my wife also didn't know that I bought a motorcycle. So 7 a.m. the delivery guy calls my phone, says the bike is here to pick up. I tell my wife I got to go downstairs for a second, and then wheel this bike back into our single floor, open floor pan loft. And there it sat for about a month as I started getting parts and things like that together. I definitely spilled oil and gasoline on the floor, significant amounts of both in our loft, and I'm still married, so I'm pretty fortunate. Here are the things that I changed or repaired on the bike. Changed out the front tire and inner tube, a new front brake caliper that was a polished one. The front forks were taken down, blasted, completely rebuilt with new seals and covers. And then a new brake line, of course, was also installed. The front headlight was changed, had a manual switch installed. These are also aftermarket light brackets or light holding brackets. We have a new tack and a new speedo that I installed. These modified side mirrors I also installed, along with front controls that were blasted and rebuilt before being installed. New master cylinder associated with the new brake line, and also the tack and speedo cables are all brand new. Also installed a new handlebar to have a flat handlebar design. A K1 tank was put on that I had painted. Also put on the side knee rubbers and badge. New, of course, fuel cap and petcock on the side that's closest to me. For the engine, I changed out all the engine brackets for ones that I had blasted and polished. Had a lower bolt kit put in. A smaller front sprocket was installed, along with new spark plug boots. Intake manifold rubbers were also put in to replace the old ones. The carburetors were taken down, cleaned, and reassembled, and pod filters put in place. New chain. Rear sets were also put on there. I moved the electronics and also the battery underneath the rear of the seat over here and also adjusted the wiring to match. Of course, a Cafe Racer seat was installed after painting black. Moving on to the further back here, along with those rear shocks being changed, fabbed and welded tabs onto the rear hoop that was also welded in place to put on rear turn signals. The regulator and rectifier were swapped out for a reg-rec combo. And finally, the rear tire and inner tube were changed out, as well as the rear brake shoes after polishing the rear wheel. So one of obviously the most visible modifications to the bike was installing a K1 tank. This is something that I really love from the first time I saw it. It's such a distinct yet classic design. Obviously, way too many parts need to go into this tank in contrast to what it actually does, which is hold fuel. But I really love the combination of chrome, rubber, shiny black, and these are the parts that I really wanted to have for the bike. So I went through and sourced and Frankensteined one up because I really wanted that look, right, for this bike. And on top of that, we all know the K1 tank drops right in to anything after that era, so that actually made it really easy to install as well. In keeping with the Cafe Racer style, I of course wanted a cafe style seat, but wanted to maintain a spot for the electronics. So I went online, found this one from a group based out of the Philippines called Benji's Cafe Racers. So they sell you a molded seat that's unpainted, comes with a brake light. They also sell the fabbed rear hoop and battery box that is underneath here. And so I purchased that. Coincidentally, in terms of like the visual flow, the lines worked really nicely together with the K1 tank. I really like how it makes a nice uniform package, keeping not only with something that's really iconic and classic of the CB450s, but also in keeping with a Cafe Racer look as well, keeping it slim, sleek, and low profile. So the second big modification that I made was rebuilding the front controls and the handlebar area as a whole. I wanted to, of course, keep with a monochromatic palette, so everything is black or gray or chrome, as you can see here. I wanted to make sure that I still had access to all the classic stock controls, so I left those as is, just polished those. Put in the flat handlebar just to maintain that sleek, low profile that you would see with the Cafe Racer. I didn't want clip-ons because that would change the stance too much and give it too much of a modern look. I wanted to still keep it classic, so I went with the straight handlebars. Used modern Speedo and tack just to stick with that chrome, slightly shiny but minimalist feel and aesthetic overall. And the same thing goes with the mirrors here that I bolted on a little bit lower than you would probably typically see on side view mirrors. So the third big change that I made was this 2-into-1 exhaust. Again, in keeping with this theme of wanting to really lighten the visual feel of the bike, similar to opening up this center area here where the battery used to be, changing the stance of the seat, having this lower K1 tank. The 2-into-1 exhaust, of course, takes away one of the exhausts in terms of the design. I'm really happy with the way it looks, with the way it sounds. It bolts right in, as you can see here, and maintains all the good tolerances, so I can still operate the rear brake, for example. But it's one of the other pieces on the bike that is not common to see on other modified CB450s, but something that I'm really happy about as one of the finishing pieces of the bike. When I started the whole project, I had this vision of sort of a Cafe Racer that wasn't super modern, and that's what I was going for, right? Something that would still respect the vintage aesthetic of what is the Honda CB450, but still having some of these lighter aspects, such as removing the electronics. So I'm really happy with how the bike looks aesthetically. Like, that is what I had in mind when I first started the project. Definitely, as you start riding it, aspects start to come out where maybe aren't as comfortable. So rear sets, for sure, since you're essentially putting your feet where the passenger foot pegs typically would exist, is not probably the most comfortable for any long rides, but for tearing around town, for shorter rides, it's perfectly fine. For longer rides, I certainly wouldn't recommend that. But otherwise, I'm pretty happy with where we are right now. I think the electronics, when I moved everything into the back, was a little bit more time consuming than I thought it was going to be. Even the simplest wiring error could cause you so much heartache. Wiring up the rear brake light, I got 2 wires soldered incorrectly, so I was plugging them into the wrong spot. And I think I blew 12 fuses trying to get it right, and I had no idea why it was wrong. And it was the most idiotic thing that caused that, but it took an entire day to figure out something that basic. So that was painful. One thing that I would like to get around to doing is replacing the front fork springs. You know, these are still the original stock ones. I was able to replace, of course, the rear shocks with more modern ones that give it a much smoother and softer ride, but I'd like to do the same for the front at some point once I am mentally ready to dive into the front fork again. But beyond that, I think it's pretty much where I envisioned it to finish, both as a project and kind of like as a vision. So I'm actually on to my second bike already in terms of a project.
What's that second bike?
It is a CB450 as well, of course, but a K0. So once I started this, I wanted to do a black bomber really bad because I just, again, love the look of those really iconic vintage Hondas. And so that's my project and my money sink now. You know, I really enjoy, probably for the most part on this, just going on long, flat stretches of road, opening it up and just enjoying it that way. But living in the center of Houston, really it's a lot of neighborhood riding. One of the streets down here, Alameda, which takes me over to my company's office, is a nice long stretch of road that I really enjoy riding on. So it's a great tear around town bike. Again, with the rear sets, it's probably not a long distance rider or a long bike trip rider, but it's a lot of fun to ride around here, and it certainly turns heads. Once again, I'm Albert. Thanks for taking the time to join me on this bike tour of my 1972 Honda CB450K5. This is all thanks to Common Motor, common-motor.com. Don't forget to like them on Facebook and Instagram, subscribe to their newsletter, and subscribe to their YouTube channel down below. Thanks.